You have a background as a regulator and a policymaker. How do we fully transition to renewable solar and get off fossil fuels?
Well, I'll give you a nice fact that always encourages me, which is all the fossil fuels that exist in the whole world, wherever they are, dug out or not so far, were formed starting about 300 million years ago. But they add up to a total of 5 days of sunlight. And all the fossil fuels we've used in history so far add up to just one day of sunlight. So we're getting all the energy we need every day for all of history in just one day. And the other good news is the technology to harvest that for our present needs already exists. So the challenge really isn't technical, which is what a lot of the fossil fuel industry would have you believe. It's really political and economic. At the end of the day, the amount of fossil fuels that the fossil fuel industry wants to sell us over the next 100 or 120 years is worth about $300 trillion. That's money we could spend doing other things, and they don't want us to. So the central issue is really about getting our act together to kind of change the subsidies, change the way energy flows in our society so that we can make the switch to technologies that exist today and put us on a totally sustainable path. 100 years from now, we may find better uses for coal or better uses for oil. It's not that we'll never use the stuff necessarily, but this is the generation where we're up against it. And what we need to do is pass on to our kids a system that uses the bounty that comes to us from the sky every day. It's in the wind, it's in the waves, it's in the light. We can use it, it's there. We have to make the regulatory and political changes, and that's really the challenge.
Your thoughts on decentralization of energy, on replacing centralized energy plants with each house or community or neighborhood having the ability to produce their own energy?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be like, high-end stereo equipment or iPods. We're going to all have lots of different configurations sometime in the relatively near future where people, depending on where they live, depending on how they want to live, will power their homes differently. Some people will get power from the car that's parked in their garage at night because it comes home and continues to generate electricity, or the batteries in it are charged at work. Others will use solar at home, wind at home, etc. It will be a highly decentralized system. There'll be walls with solar, the walls of your house might be solar receptors in certain geographies. At the same time, we're still going to be networked. You're going to be protected against, it's not like you're going to be standing alone in the wild, wild west. There's going to be an energy network that continues to exist, and people will feed into it in a much more democratic and decentralized way. So there'll be redundancy through an existing grid, but that grid will be supplied in a much more decentralized way. There may also be some great centralized forms of power that provide backstop or continue to be sold, whether it's hydropower or centralized solar. So we're going to see we're going to see an equally rich and complicated energy system with as much great economic potential. It's just going to be a lot cleaner and a lot more customizable and a lot more in the control of the consumer and their ability to make choices about how they want to power their lives and how they want to live.
What's your take on geoengineering?
I'm not a big fan, but it's something we have to take seriously. We are already engaged in it. Global warming is geoengineering. We are engineering our way into a warmer planet the way we power our lives. It has some major, there's a lot of downsides to a lot of the ideas. You can really mess up the oceans if you try the wrong things. If you're committed to putting reflectors kind of in the sky, what happens when you stop? Are there sudden climate perturbations? What happens around national security if people disrupt the kinds of engineering you're engaged in to try to cool the planet more aggressively? So and also, frankly, we just don't understand the planetary systems well enough to intervene at that level. Global warming itself is a very, very simple phenomenon. You know that if you put panes of glass in a greenhouse, it's going to get warmer. CO2 it's not even a chemical reaction. We're just putting barriers to the escape of heat into the atmosphere. Climate change is incredibly simple. There's no question it's happening. We know exactly how it's happening. We just don't know all the effects it's going to have. So geoengineering is risky because those are all more complicated systems. Yeah. On the other hand, if we don't start looking at it seriously, we could because we don't understand what the impacts of all that extra heat we're trapping in the planet are going to be. We're not insuring ourselves properly. Just like we have to take out an insurance policy by reducing our dependence on fossil fuels and our emissions, we have to look seriously at what the geoengineering possibilities are in case things go south really, really fast.
I'm curious your thoughts on letting our planet heal, on using things like biomimicry, on just not getting in the way of our planet's natural abilities to cycle carbon. How do we heal our planet?
Well, look, the the reality is we're well on our way to having damaged it and embedded so much carbon in the atmosphere that we're looking at least 100 to 200 years of unpredictable change already. We've locked in a lot of change over the last 200 years. You're probably looking at least, at best case scenario, 200 to 300 years before levels go back, even if we were to take aggressive action today. That being said, the planet is going to remain a very, very beautiful place. History is full of catastrophic predictions about how disastrously, things are going to get uglier, et cetera. People are going to continue to have a world they love to look at and they love to see. It may not have a lot of fish in it, for example, because the ocean will be acidified, but the waves will still be there, et cetera, et cetera. The real challenge is really to our own health and to human health and well-being. We're looking at 500 million climate refugees in the next 50 to 100 years, just from climate change alone. We're looking at the potential of, subways in some of our major cities being underwater, World Heritage sites like Alexandria, Egypt, or Venice being underwater. These are the real tragedies, not just even the loss of culture, but the health impacts. If we don't get off the fossil fuel treadmill, imagine digging up, if we continue to power the world with coal and oil, imagine digging up 4 times more coal than we do today. Imagine the cancer and the smog. Imagine the impact on asthma and to our kids. Imagine the refugees who will be clamoring for higher ground all around the world. I think we got to keep our eyes on keeping humans well off, and the planet will do its job over time. It will be a different planet. It'll be very beautiful. The goal is to keep it as safe for us as possible in the meantime.
I'm curious your thoughts on both third world countries leapfrogging carbon and the expansion in first world countries like the United States of wind and solar, using, for example, the situation, the example of Germany, where they had more than half of their electricity in some days this summer being produced simply by rooftop solar panels.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I think the advantage that developing countries have is that they don't have necessarily a built-out infrastructure and a giant political system around energy the way we do. I mean, the U.S. Exports hundreds of millions of dollars in our own capital to bring oil into the country. Obviously, we fight big wars that cost trillions of dollars in oil-producing regions, largely around oil itself. And I think, developing countries are taking a look at that and going, maybe we can get off that treadmill. The challenge is that, the same methods that are helping the U.S. become a net energy exporter are going to work in a lot of developing countries. So they're going to have this this ability to generate a lot of revenue from generating fossil fuels as well. So they, in each of those markets, in each political context, people are going to have to make a choice for a more sustainable planet. And in many ways, we have to make that possible by not continuing to consume on our end and by developing the new technology. The great analogy, of course, is cell phones. Lots of countries just never ended up having to build out a major telecom infrastructure because cell phones allowed you to have these individual units that didn't require a huge infrastructure to deploy, and often they are well ahead of us in terms of cell coverage and data coverage. I just came back from Mozambique. I was there for 3 weeks recently, and there's high-speed internet at an incredibly cheap rate on mobile phones that you can link to your laptops. And the hope is that developing countries will take that approach with energy. A lot of them are in tropical countries. There's lots of sun, lots of wind, lots of wave power, and lots of ways to avoid pollution.